Hello, my name is Robert Baines, and I am President and CEO of the NATO Association of Canada, a charitable NGO dedicated to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. Thoughts about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization do not usually occur to Canadians on a daily basis, but the peace, prosperity, and security that NATO provides are integral to our way of life. The principle that an attack upon one is an attack upon all is the foundation of NATO and maintains peace through strength, perhaps the greatest lesson of the death and destruction of the Second World War. We continue to remind Canadians about this lesson and hope you will join us and continue to engage with the NATO Association as part of our online community via Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can continue to be part of our future events as well. I'm happy to welcome you today to our discussion about Canada, NATO, and the Indo Pacific, NATO's Western flank. The idea of a Western flank of NATO is not one that's often used or thought about, and we wanted to use it to remind people that NATO does have a Pacific coast, as it were, and that while flank may conjure up military connotations, the involvement of NATO and other multilateral organizations may be useful in stabilizing the Indo-Pacific area. Our presentation starts with Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and his statement at the latest foreign ministers meeting in Riga, Latvia in December of 2021. He explains the alliance's belief in the necessity to respond to global challenges beyond North America and Europe. The Secretary General specifically articulates the intent of the 30 NATO allies to work more closely with partners in the Indo-Pacific. This statement is followed by a relevant section of Canada's speech from the throne of November 2021, when the Governor-General of Canada, Mary Simon, presented the government's agenda, including a statement on engagement in the Indo-Pacific to reinforce international peace and security, the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights. Working with allies to achieve this is specifically mentioned. Finally, we will have the chance to hear from NATO Association Vice President Dr. Tina Park as she hosts a discussion moderated by Dr. Peter Loewen of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He will be guiding us through a discussion with the Ambassador of Japan to Canada and the High Commissioners of India and New Zealand to Canada. I hope you will enjoy the discussion and stay engaged. Thanks so much.
NATO is and will remain an alliance of Europe and North America. But our region faces global security challenges. They require global awareness and global reach. We cannot confine security to specific regions. What happens far away matters for us right here. In fact, many of today's threats are not restrained by geography or lines on a map. Cyber and terrorist attacks, aggressive actions in space, the use of hypersonic glide vehicles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and climate change are truly global challenges. Dealing with them requires working closely with like-minded partner countries around the world. This is not just nice to do, it is an absolute necessity. We should intensify our cooperation with NATO's partners in the Asia Pacific, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. We should engage more also with other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we should further strengthen our cooperation with the European Union.
The last 19 months have underscored that we live in a deeply interconnected world. Canada must stand up on the pressing challenges of our time through our own commitments and by increasing our engagement with international partners, coalitions, and organizations. In the face of rising authoritarianism and great power competition, Canada must reinforce international peace and security, the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights. Canada's prosperity and middle-class jobs depend on preserving and expanding open, rules-based trade and ensuring our supply chains are strong and resilient. At home, the government will continue to protect Canadians from threats to our communities, our society, and our democracy. A changing world requires adapting and expanding diplomatic engagement. Canada will continue working with key allies and partners while making deliberate efforts to deepen partnerships in the Indo Pacific and across the Arctic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Park, and as the Vice President of the NATO Association of Canada, I am delighted to welcome you to our panel discussion today on Canada, NATO, and the Indo Pacific, featuring very distinguished ambassadors of our partner nations. We would like to thank the Mines program at the Department of National Defense in Canada and the NATO's Public Diplomacy Division at the NATO HQ for generously sponsoring today's event. The NATO Association of Canada is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization with the central mandate of educating Canadians on the importance of NATO in promoting international peace and security, particularly Canada's role in maintaining the rules-based order with our allies and protecting our key values. Despite being a country that borders on the Pacific Ocean, Canada's relations with our partners in the Indo-Pacific region have generally not realized their full potential. We have large diaspora communities reflecting many Asian countries, and Canada faces serious challenges when it comes to presence, investment, and meaningful engagement with our partners in the Indo-Pacific region. When we look at the rise and expansion of Chinese power and influence, as well as continued threats from countries like North Korea, especially with their nuclear weapons program and cyber capabilities, we know that there are real and imminent security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region for our alliance that can no longer be ignored. For much of our history, Canada has relied on the American leadership when it comes to our defense policies, and the relationship with our neighbor in the South continues to dominate Canadian foreign policy agenda. But it is also becoming increasingly evident that Canada's future prosperity and growth will not just come from the United States, when we look at the rise of protectionism and Canada's lack of competitiveness in the US markets. As many studies have shown, Canada's future growth and prosperity will have to come from trade and investment in the fastest growing economies of the world, which lie in the Indo-Pacific region. So from the Canadian perspective, we have vested interest in peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region, and there is a pressing need for Canada to be better understanding different priorities and interests of our partner nations and be more actively engaged in finding peaceful solutions for many disputes and challenges in the region. At the NATO Association of Canada, we believe that dialogue and engagement are absolutely essential for finding a rational way forward amidst growing challenges from China, Russia, and pressures of the global pandemic. Today's discussion seeks to identify key opportunities and priorities to deepen Canada's relations with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. To help us navigate through today's discussion, I would like to introduce our moderator, Professor Peter Loewen, Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy based at the University of Toronto. He is a globally recognized political scientist who teaches in the Department of Political Science and the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Professor Loewen is Director of PEARL, Policy Elections and Representation Lab, Associate Director of the Schwarzman Institute, and a Senior Fellow at Massey College and a Fellow with the Public Policy Forum. From 2020 until 2022, he is serving as a distinguished visitor at the Institute for Advanced Study at Tel Aviv University. So without further delay, everyone, please join me in welcoming Professor Loewen.
Thank you very much, Tina, for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for those framing comments for this conversation. I'll say it really is my honor to be moderating this conversation and to be one of the people who's going to learn as much as all of you from this conversation. I'll just say, to underline what Tina said as a setup for this, and I'll introduce our guests and turn it right over to them, that we have big challenges in Canada. And I think that there are two big global challenges, particular to us, that we need to reconcile ourselves to. One is that there's the continuing realization of what it means for us to be in NATO and the depth of that honor, but also the depth of that obligation as a country. And the second is that Canada is realizing, perhaps later than it should have, and certainly later than some of its allies have, that we are not only a country of the Atlantic, but we are a country of the Pacific, indeed of the Indo Pacific. We are not any farther away in flying hours from New Delhi or from Tokyo than our colleagues in Wellington, New Zealand are. So it's taken us some time to realize that we are a country of the Pacific, but indeed we are. So today's, I think, a wonderful occasion for Canadians listening to this and for people who are concerned about NATO to learn about from our allies how we should be thinking about our obligations on our western flank and in the Indo Pacific more generally. So we're very fortunate to have the three individuals we have with us today. I'll introduce them in order in which they're going to speak. And after I introduce the three of them, I'll turn it over to our first guest, and they're going to take some time to tell us what they think Canada should be thinking about in terms of our obligations in the Indo Pacific. Our first guest, then, who will be speaking first, is Ambassador Kawamura Yasuhisa. Mr. Kawamura was named Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to Canada in November of 2019. And it's really our honor to have him here with us today. He's been with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1981. And his prior work included serving as the Deputy Representative of Japan to the United Nations and Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission of Japan in India. So he gives you a sense of the importance of the relationship between Japan and Canada, that they would send someone with such deep experience. He'll be followed by High Commissioner Martin Harvey, who took up his role as High Commissioner of New Zealand in Canada in January 2020. So that was perhaps fortuitous timing, though New Zealand was an okay place to be in the early days of COVID. Previous to that, he was Chief Negotiator in the Trade and Economic Group of the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, responsible for New Zealand's free trade agreement negotiations with the European Union, excuse me. So he similarly was asked to carry pretty heavy and important files before coming to Canada. So we're honored to have him. And our final guest, our third guest today, is High Commissioner Ajay Bisaria, who is the High Commissioner of India to Canada since March of 2020, a career diplomat who's earlier served as High Commissioner of India to Pakistan and as Ambassador to Poland and Lithuania. And he's represented India at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. and in embassies in Berlin and Moscow. So this is just a stellar lineup of people we have. We're very fortunate to have all three of you in Canada as ambassadors of your countries, and we're very, very doubly fortunate to have you with us here today. So what we want to do is just take the chance as a start for you to give us a sense of how Canada should be thinking about its role in the Pacific and what the role of our allies is in the Indo-Pacific. So to kick off our conversation, I'm going to turn the microphone over to His Excellency, Mr. Kawamura.
Well, thank you, Professor Loewen, for your kind introduction. And thank you for the invitation to this important forum today. The Indo-Pacific region has become the growth center of the world. According to the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific published in September of this year, the Indo-Pacific region is home to 60% of the world's population, producing 60% of global GDP, contributing to 2/3 of current global growth. By 2030, the overwhelming majority of the 2.4 billion new members of the middle class entering the global economy will live in the Indo-Pacific, this region. The region is also home of challenges at the same time to rule-based institutions and maritime security that, without proactive engagement, will have the potential to derail the region's and, in the end, global stability and prosperity as well. Against this background, Japan has been working together with partner countries to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. So let me start by elaborating on the Japan-initiated free and open Indo-Pacific vision and the current picture of Japan-Canada joint endeavor for realizing it. The free and open Indo-Pacific, its idea was first mentioned in August 2007. Then Japanese Prime Minister Abe delivered a speech at the Parliament of the Republic of India. He stated the Pacific and the Indian Oceans are now bringing about the dynamic coupling as seas of freedom and of prosperity. A broader Asia that broke away from geographical boundaries is now beginning to take on a distinctive form. 9 years later, in 2016, Prime Minister Abe, in his address at the International Conference on African Development in Nairobi, stated, Japan bears the responsibility for fostering the confluence of the Pacific and Indian Oceans and of Asia and Africa into a place which values freedom, the rule of law, and the market economy, free from force or coercion, and making it prosperous. Actually, I personally accompanied Prime Minister Abe to this conference, and I witnessed the kind of launching of the free and open Indo-Pacific in the place of Africa, which faces the two oceans, Indian Oceans and Pacific Oceans altogether. This address has resulted into formulation of free and open Indo-Pacific vision today. Free and open Indo-Pacific is a vision to formulate a strategy to engage in the region based on supporting resilience, prosperity, and stability grounded in the promotion of a rule-based inclusive order. It is no coincidence that countries not limited to Japan, but also India, Australia, ASEAN, France, Germany, the EU, and the United States have launched a strategy vision or outbreak on the geostrategic concept of the Indo-Pacific, and that these visions include many common elements. The most important is a commitment to shared values or the rule-based order, a common banner to rally under and use as foundations for peace and stability in the region. I cannot emphasize their importance enough amidst increasing attempts to undermine them in the ocean, in the maritime security. What we are witnessing today in East and South China Seas, unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force may occur in any part of the region or the seas connecting the region. Japan-Canada Free and Open Indo-Pacific Cooperation initiated at the Japan-Canada Summit meeting in Ottawa in April 2019, about 2 years ago, when Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Trudeau shared their views on the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Following this agreement, in May of this year, during the pandemic period, our two foreign ministers announced the 6 operative areas of cooperation towards the realization of this vision. Namely, first, the rule of law; second, peacekeeping operations, peace building and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief; health, security, and responding to COVID-19; energy security; free trade promotion and trade agreement implementation; and environment and climate change. All those 6 areas are comprehensively presented for the further cooperation programs between the two countries. So this agreement means that Japan and Canada have now opened a new chapter, a meaningful step forward to wide-ranged actions in full recognition that acting together is power. I need to underline, acting together is power. In NATO foreign ministers meeting last year, then Japan's foreign minister Motegi mentioned, it is most reassuring that to have NATO as Japan's partner as Japan strives to advance the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific by referring services, a severe security environment, as well as growing challenges to the rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific region. Individual partnership and cooperation program between Japan and NATO describes Japan and NATO are reliable and natural partners, sharing common values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, as well as strategic interests. Japan and NATO cooperate closely in order to maintain and strengthen a free and open international order based on the rule of law. Japan and NATO are each determined to safeguard these shared values and strategic interests, as well as the freedom and the security of our populations. I want to reiterate again, acting together is power in the Japan-NATO context as well. Today, more countries and regional organizations talk about their strategic engagement with the Indo Pacific region. The establishment of an Indo Pacific strategic dialogue to coordinate shared priorities between Canada and the United States has just been announced. Japan as a country initiated the vision of free and open Indo Pacific, is determined to promote in a robust manner a free and open Indo Pacific with allies and like-minded partners, countries. I therefore cannot emphasize enough the importance of the webinar today, which will discuss the way to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific among distinguished panelists. I look forward to a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very, very fine framing of this, Ambassador Kawamura. I'm going to ask High Commissioner Martin Harvey to weigh in now.
Kia ora koutou, greetings, bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Dr. Loewen, for your introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here. I really welcome the chance to participate in this valuable webinar today. As an initial offering, I wanted to set out how New Zealand sees itself in the Indo-Pacific region and a few views on some of our key relationships. First of all, I speak for New Zealand as a committed actor in the multilateral system, the rules-based system. As our Prime Minister stated earlier this year, we have entered an era of formidable environmental, health, and geopolitical difficulties. And in this era, each nation is faced with choices. We either ignore the impact of our domestic decisions, what they have on others, and choose a path of isolationism and nationalism, or we take the view that concerted collective action is the necessary response. In recent years, we've seen major changes in the environment of our region, which is at our doorstep. So we have to keep asking ourselves, how should we respond? And that is very much an evolving question. But our values remain constant through it all. And our values support a key set of fundamental principles by which we want to conduct business in our region and the wider world. First, respect for rules, consistency with international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, freedom of navigation and overflight. Second, openness, that the region is open for trade, investment, and the movement of people to support prosperity and open supply chains. Third, inclusivity, that all countries in the region can participate. Fourth, that sovereignty is upheld and respected. And last but not least, transparency, that states are honest about their foreign policy objectives and initiatives beyond their borders. Our priorities and outlook in our region are shaped very much by where we sit. We're a Pacific nation. We're a bicultural nation founded on a partnership between the indigenous Maori people and Pākehā, that is European New Zealanders. But we also include in our society people of the Pacific, many other Pacific peoples who are integral to our identity. And we have strong linkages throughout the Pacific in all possible dimensions. So we always look to the Pacific in terms of what we do. And the challenges are formidable at the moment and becoming increasingly so. On top of the existential issue of climate change, and this is real, very real for the low-lying countries of the Pacific, has come the huge blow of COVID-19, which has ripped the heart out of many economies and necessitated concerted action by countries like Australia and New Zealand to support them. And there are also the increased geopolitical threats and challenges that Ambassador Kawamura has so well articulated. Our government's immediate and long-term focus has been on lifting our engagement with the region in terms of trying to deliver long-term resilience through investment and long-term partnerships, and encouraging a high degree of Pacific ownership and innovation. But the complexities of the challenges in the Pacific are to a significant degree those of the wider Indo-Pacific. And that's why we've embraced the idea of the Indo-Pacific as central to our interests. Among these interests, I would say, first of all, our partnership with Australia, our indispensable partner and ally, who sits at the intersection of both the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Next, the rapidly growing and demographically young countries of ASEAN and the ASEAN-centric structures such as the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, with which we are actively engaged. Next, our deep engagement with the region's trade and economic architecture, much of which we helped to build. APEC, which we had the pleasure of hosting this year. The ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. China is central to our interests. It remains an engine of global growth and one of our most significant relationships, in particular in trade, but it is also one that is increasingly complex. There are our strong relationships with the nations of North Asia and the Pacific Rim, including the United States and Canada. Our relationship with Canada is one of our closest international relationships and partnerships. It's long-standing, it's like-minded, based on shared history and values, and it's highly productive. We welcome and encourage indications of Canada's intentions to increase its commitment and engagement with our region through its own Indo-Pacific strategy. And then there is India, a valuable partner for New Zealand and a country with whom we've been trying to build and add substance to our relationship for a very long time. And we share some common pastimes that always bring us together in happy competition. We also welcome wider interest in and focus on the Indo-Pacific through the strategies of the European Union, the United Kingdom and Germany, and countries with whom we share close relations and core values. In our view, the Indo-Pacific region will need to conduct its affairs in accordance with the principles I've outlined if it's to successfully address common challenges. Last, just a word on NATO. We welcome NATO's renewed focus on the Indo-Pacific and see NATO's emphasis on the rule of law, the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, and the rules-based system as being aligned with New Zealand's perspectives and values. And we equally welcome the focus of individual allies and other like-minded countries on the region. As you know, we have our own Indo-Pacific strategy, which shares key features with those of other partners. The reasons for focusing on the region are obvious, given the challenges faced, recovering from the pandemic, on top of existing development needs in so many countries, increasing strategic competition, and of course the existential threat of climate change. We believe that we have a lot to contribute on these discussions, being, like Canada, part of the region and being now deeply embedded in its architecture. Thank you very much for the chance to contribute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey, for those really useful comments. I'm not going to ask you to comment on Kohli's dismissal from the match yesterday with India, nor am I going to ask His Excellency Ajay Bisaria to comment on that either. But I will ask you, sir, to comment on Canada's relationship and NATO in the Pacific. So the floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loewen, for the introduction. And let me begin by thanking the NATO Association of Canada for putting together this very important conversation on the Indo-Pacific. And of course, I'm delighted to join friends and colleagues from Canada and Japan and New Zealand for sharing some Indian perspectives on the Indo-Pacific. What I thought I'd do, like my colleagues, is make 4 broad points related to the Indo-Pacific as a construct from India's point of view, the disruption in the region caused by recent geopolitical changes, the particular threat we perceive to democracies, and the role that Canada and India together can play as Indo-Pacific democracies. Now, first, while the salience of the Indo-Pacific in recent years has increased, it is not a new construct. Historically, the Indian and Pacific Oceans have enjoyed a deep connect, facilitating the flow of goods and people and building commercial and cultural linkages. The geographical reach of India's idea of the Indo-Pacific was mentioned by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And this was essentially stretching from the eastern shores of Africa to the western shores of the Americas, covering both the Indian and Pacific Oceans. India's foreign minister recently pointed out that the Indo-Pacific construct represents a return to history. This is not tomorrow's forecast, but it's yesterday's reality. In fact, the Indo-Pacific construct reflects several geopolitical processes, including the reality of globalization, the emergence of multipolarity, and the benefits of rebalancing. It also implies in many ways an overcoming of the Cold War and a rejection of bipolarity and dominance. India's implementing framework for the Indo-Pacific is a very practical one, inviting the countries of the region to cooperate on 7 specific areas of cooperation which have been outlined as the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. These range from maritime security and ecology to disaster management and to trade connectivity. And the democracies of the Indo-Pacific have already intensified their cooperation in these areas, and this is very much an ongoing and deepening process. Second, the geopolitical disruptions, particularly the rise of China, has accelerated various dynamics in the Indo-Pacific and increased both the economic and security challenges before the region. Global security today is not just a transatlantic, Eurasian, or continental construct, but includes now a maritime focus on the Indo-Pacific. This conference itself and its headline certainly reflects the recognition that NATO's western borders extend to the Pacific. Several European countries now have their own visions and strategies, ranging from the EU to Germany to France to the Netherlands and the UK on the Indo-Pacific. We've also seen, as mentioned by both our Japanese and New Zealand colleagues, the emphasis is on a free and open Indo-Pacific, on free markets, on a rule of law based global order. And as our colleague from New Zealand mentioned, the centrality of ASEAN to the region is something that all the democracies of the region recognize. I won't even go to the extent that you hinted about our common love for cricket. I can assure you that India does not want to impose the love of cricket as a precondition for Indo-Pacific democracies or for Indo-Pacific countries. We are not imposing any of those ideas. The third important factor I wanted to talk about was that of democracy. The democracies of the Indo-Pacific region are particularly threatened and challenged by the developments taking place in the Indo-Pacific. Several of them have come together to address the challenges and work also on their common economic destiny. The meeting of the Quad, in which India joins the US, Australia, and Japan, is the latest example of Indo-Pacific democracies coming together, particularly with an economic focus. The upcoming Democracy Summit in the US is also an expression of that impulse. Such a gathering would stress the importance for the world's democracies to stand together at a time of global uncertainty and rising expansionism and authoritarianism. I think this threat to democracy is global, but it is being felt most acutely in the Indo-Pacific region, where not only the democratic rule-based order is threatened, but several democracies face threats and pressure from non-democratic regimes in the form of economic coercion, cross-border terrorism, and some cases even naked military aggression across their borders. We see, therefore, a critical requirement for democracies to get together, especially those in the Indo-Pacific region, to come together to defend the rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific, which flows from the cherished democratic values, which we've been talking about, of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations, of the need for peaceful resolution of disputes through dialogue, and adherence, of course, to international rules and law. While each democracy is unique, the fate of democracy across different countries is connected. Never before have we seen the need for democracies to come together to this extent to defend international rules and norms. While democratic countries do not necessarily agree with one another on everything, what we do is they value and share the concerns that must become the foundation for building some robust cooperation to address a wide range of issues, such as increasing transparency in government operations, in attacking corruption, in protecting democratic institutions from foreign interference. 75 years of the functioning of India's democracy has demonstrated that democracies in the Indo-Pacific region can be robust and could prove to mount an effective challenge to authoritarianism and expansionism. India's strong democracy represents not just a mechanism for internal consultation and cohesion, but is also a bulwark against autocracies as it seeks to collaborate with other democracies to create a better economic and security climate in the region. And this brings me to the fourth point, and that is the role of Canada. We see Canada's role in the Indo-Pacific and as an Indo-Pacific democracy as important and something that will, the need for which will grow in the coming years. We await with great interest the official articulation of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, but we welcome all that we have seen so far. We welcome the signaling by Canada of its own upgraded and renewed vision of the Indo-Pacific during the recent throne speech by the Governor General. We have been collaborating, of course, closely with Canada and exchanging details of our Indo-Pacific strategy and its different pillars. We see a great deal of potential to mesh our strategies, to have common goals for these strategies. And as Canada works out its strategy, we see and note the pledge by the government that it is, quote, it will commit working with key allies and partners while making deliberative efforts to deepen partnership in the Indo-Pacific, unquote. And Canada's increased profile in the Indo-Pacific will be something that all our countries will welcome, and it will certainly also serve to strengthen our common region. So let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, High Commissioner. That's very helpful. it's my job now to moderate this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm going to follow the number one rule, which is that the moderator should get out of the way as quickly as possible. So let me just say that I think all three of you have articulated three areas of cooperation and really challenge for countries in the Indo Pacific. One is to the maintenance of democracies and maintaining the resilience of democracies. The second is expanding trade. And I think we can say on that, there's both the technical problems of trade right now in what is really a huge supply chain problem around the world, and that's a trade problem in large part, but there's the more expansive, imaginative things we want to do with trade agreements that Canada is mid-course on in some cases. And then with the third one, there are these difficult issues of security. Now, to govern is to choose, as the old saying goes. And what I'd love to hear from you are your thoughts on, from a Canadian perspective, as we work out our Indo-Pacific strategy, what's the weight we should put on these things, or what should we prioritize in terms of advancing some trade deals that are already pretty far along, but some have stalled, in contributing to this global conversation on democracy? I note that there's 4 countries in the Quad, and we're not one of them, though we are part of the Summit on Democracy. And to what degree should we be thinking about security in both, quantitative terms, but also just the hard terms of putting material into the Indo-Pacific? I'd love to hear the insights of all three of you, all three gentlemen, on where Canada should be moving, most swiftly or most deeply across those three channels of democracy, trade, and security. And I'll start with Ambassador Kawamura, please.
Thank you, Dr. Loewen. My answer is very short and brief. We have already an answer. As I introduced our interactions between Japan and Canada in this context of free and open Indo-Pacific for the past 2 years, between the prime ministers and between foreign ministers, we have extended a strategic conversations already, and spelled out already 6 priority areas of future actions to be implemented by 2 of us. Rule of law, peacekeeping operations, peace building, humanitarian assistance, health security, energy security, trade implementation. So those are the 6 priority areas. Very comprehensive in the very pragmatic approach to each one of those major pillars. What I want to underline in this discussion is that the formation or the talk about the vision of free and open in the Pacific, it should not be perceived as the formation of military alliance or a military containment alliance. It is free and open in the Pacific vision is a bit very different from those military strategic formation of the alliance. Rather, it is an open, inclusive vision which underlines a very important concept which runs through each one of those 6 priority areas, which is the rule-based order. This is the very basic, fundamental, and very important, most important principle, so that every partner country in the region or elsewhere should abide by this principle. There are a couple of measures and pathways to reach this goal. So we don't specify this should be the way to realize that. We certainly, if the countries with the like-minded partners, if they declare they abide by the rule-based international order and make their own efforts, that is the most welcome approach to this formation of the common vision. Having said that, among those 6 priority areas, Japan and Canada have already initiated in a substantial manner for the implementation of the joint works. One area is defense cooperation. Professor Loewen mentioned in his introductory comments, for example, there is a challenge from North Korea in terms of strategic stability, successive of provocative actions in terms of the ballistic missiles launch or nuclear devices. That's against the rule of law, international security, governed by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. All actions are against it. And it is posing the threat to the international security, including the security of Canada and the United States and our friends in the Indo Pacific. So Canada joined us, and Australia and the other partner countries in monitoring the illicit ship-to-ship transfer, which is believed to be a source of income for North Korea to conduct such illegal actions in strategic terms. It's most welcome such a joint endeavor for that monitoring activities. That's one good example. And in case of COVID-19 health security area, our two countries jointly cooperated for the launch of the summit meeting on the COVAX AMC facility this summer. So a couple of others have already implemented. So already the programs are on, but I think we always have to remember that the fundamental goal of talking about this freedom in the region is to secure the rule-based order in the international community. And we welcome Canada's participation in this joint endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. High Commissioner Bisaria, do you have a sense from India's perspective of where Canada, if it prioritizes, should prioritize across those three imperatives of protecting democracy, promoting trade, and contributing to security in the Indo-Pacific?
Absolutely. You know, we have been having conversations with the Canadian government on the Indo-Pacific strategy pretty much upstream for a while now. And what we do is, of course, brief them on our strategy. And I would agree with my Japanese colleague that the approach is that there is an overarching agreement on an overarching principle, which we are talking of the free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, and which promotes a rules-based order. And within that, we would expect each country, including Canada, to articulate a strategy which aligns with its larger foreign policy goals, but also takes into account the concerns and priorities of its partners. And I think within that framework, I would agree with you when you reference democracy, trade, and security, that it is along these parameters that we develop our policy goals. But I would say in the economic frame, we also talk of financial security and our financial systems. Within security, we also talk of terrorism and the threat of terrorism in our region. And then we also have conversations about climate change and building back better and greener, and certainly also about technology and technology sharing. So I would say that apart from those broader areas, there would be a few other goals that we can talk about. And if you see that each of our countries, Japan and New Zealand mentioned it, India as well, have also started getting into specific priority areas of where they could coordinate and cooperate with other democracies. So apart from the larger political constructs of, say, the Quad or the Democracy Summit, what India has articulated is what we call the Indo Pacific Oceans Initiative. And we talk of 7 particular pillars where we coordinate with partners, and one or the other partner takes the lead and takes us along there. For instance, we've been talking about maritime security, maritime ecology. We've been talking of disaster management, trade connectivity, shipping lines. So we would need, once we articulate the broader strategy, to get into collaborating on specific pillars and verticals. And I think this Canada is already doing in some shape or form with each of our countries. But what we would like to have is a more coherent kind of coordination on these issues along the parameters of our Indo-Pacific strategy.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. I mean, what I'm hearing from you there, essentially, in some sense, is that they're all priorities, but you'd like Canada to be plugged into them in a more coordinated, perhaps a more articulated or forward-looking fashion. High Commissioner Harvey, I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, the question on the table, of course, is whether in those three priorities of building resilient democracies and ensuring trade in the Indo-Pacific and ensuring security in the Indo-Pacific, whether Canada, in developing its strategy, should be thinking about one of those as a priority over others, or should be trying to engage on multiple fronts at once. I know you'll be sensitive to just the sheer difficulty of putting together trade agreements, for example, right, and the trade-offs that are involved in these things. What's your intuition from where you sit?
Well, I think any strategy like this does require action on a broad front, and Canada's a big enough and I guess wealthy enough nation to be able to engage fairly comprehensively if it chooses. And I guess that is the challenge being thrown to Canada, which is, you know, how more committed can it be to the Indo-Pacific region? Because of course it faces challenges north, south, east, and west. And is not as big a country as the United States. It doesn't have that kind of resource. But I think as it thinks through its Indo-Pacific strategy, it will have to think about what the resource requirement will be, because it does require presence. It requires consistent engagement across a range of fronts. Canada and its foreign policy is well placed to engage on the issues of democracy and human rights and the values that underpin a rules-based system. And that, I think, as we would say, you know, just requires engagement in the forums of the region very consistently. And I think Canada understands this very well. On trade, they're doing this. We're very pleased that they're part of the CPTPP agreement, and they have launched initiatives to negotiate with the likes of Indonesia, the ASEAN countries as a whole, and that's very positive. Trade and economic engagement is and agreements reinforcing the rules in the region is hugely important. Security presence, of course. I mean, we welcome the presence of Canadians in the region and in the presence of their engagement in military forums, of course, security forums. But also some of the help that they can give through the projection of their armed forces in the region. The issues surrounding North Korea have been already mentioned. The point I would emphasize, I guess, as an addition is development and development assistance. If we look at the huge problems being faced by the region, and this is really across the region, we see them most acutely in the Pacific countries that are threatened by climate change to begin with, and they will require huge resources to make them resilient to the growing climatic sea rise impacts. They will require a large devotion of resource to recover from the impacts of COVID-19, and the ongoing challenges of being sustainable economies. So Canada, and I think they're doing this, they will need to focus on the development dimensions and what further resources they can put in, what kind of direct engagement can they have with the partners that are already heavily engaged in development issues in our region. And I think Canada would be very, very welcome as a bigger participant in those endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, what I'm hearing just from my ears here, right, is that there's there is really an open invitation for more engagement from Canada across all of these fronts, rather than inviting us in on one and not the others, because there is faith that we can operate across multiple dimensions at once. And it's a nice thing to hear as a Canadian, I tell you. Let me ask you two more questions. Start with a really tough one, and then I've got a hopeful one to finish with. But the tough one is the issue of the challenge of China, and what looks like, from a Canadian perspective, an engagement which is increasingly difficult to run across two dimensions at once, right? To run the track of constructive engagement where we have shared interests, and then competition or straight talk. It's another way of thinking about it, where we have divergent interests. As you know, our foreign policy towards China has been complicated, and in some ways, frankly, frozen by the issue of the two Michaels for more than 3 years, and we're trying to get that back on track. But as we look, zooming out from Canada a little bit, what's the role of NATO countries, and what's the role of democracies more broadly in working alongside and living alongside China in the Indo Pacific? Let me start with you, High Commissioner Harvey. We'll go to you first this time.
I think we can only speak from our own experience. First and foremost is the rise of China is a given, and we expect that will continue. They will be a major country and power in our region. For us, we have no choice. We must engage. There must be peaceful coexistence with China. We have to look at our engagement across a very broad front, and accentuate the positives and the areas of commonality and engagement, and also be very clear and consistent in areas where we disagree, where we don't share values. And our foreign minister, our Prime Minister have been very open in stating this, and China, I think, would recognise that we've been very consistent in our engagement with them in areas of agreement and disagreement. Canada, I think, would wish to take a similar approach. It's one that is not a question of disengagement or disconnection. It has to be one based on building the pillars of cooperation that reinforce coexistence, but being very clear and being prepared to challenge where we disagree. New Zealand recently has stated in the UN our views around the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and how that should apply, and how we should be working to uphold that and abide by that system. That applies to all parties, but it's something that where we feel strongly we need to put those views and work with like-minded partners to reinforce them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. High Commissioner Bisaria.
Is a reality. Sorry. I said I would agree that the rise of China is a reality, and all our countries, democracies of the Indo Pacific and those outside, are finding ways and means of dealing with this often unruly rise. For India, it's expressing itself as a kind of expansionism which we face directly on our borders. So our relations are going through a rough patch as our armies stand eyeball to eyeball in the Himalayas. But broadly, we are dealing with China's rise, and we know that there are elements of competition, there are elements of collaboration as well, and as also elements of contestation. So we deal with all these, and I think each country, each of our countries represented here definitely has had to deal with some aspects of China's rise, which we don't agree with, or some aspect of its behavior that we'd like to check. But I think in overall terms, we need to be conscious of China's rise, and we need to develop our own way of dealing with this, but individually, but also as a concert of democracies together.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kawamura.
Yes, it's a very timely question. Japan has a very substantive trade relations with China. Number one trading partner is China. In the meantime, in the what is witnessing in the East China Sea and South China Sea, that is the attempts, unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force. And this is a challenge to the rule-based international order. As Ambassador Harvey said it, of course, the maritime security, maritime ocean trade transactions. I think the United Nations a Convention on the Law of the Seas, UN UNCLOS, should be applied. That is the sole guiding principle for the rule-based international order in the region. So we Japan that like to emphasize this point. All the issues, arguments should be resolved very peacefully within the framework of the international law. So on this particular point, we'd like to pursue the joint actions with the like-minded partners in our usual and ordinary interactions in various fields. When it comes to economic area, I also, again, emphasize the importance of the rule-based approach to the economic issue. When in the past, Japan had the problem with the so-called rare earth importation. That was stopped. And then we took two approaches. One is the legal one. That is, we took the case to the WTO dispute settlement process. Two, as a response to the newly arriving situations of disruption of the supply chain, we diversified the industries, made an effort to diversify the source of the supply chain. With those combination of the actions and the reactions, we responded to the newly arrived situations in a very coordinated fashion. There's no silver bullet to the issues presented today in this economic front as well. But the fundamental principle of approaching to this difficult task to balance the reality of a country like China and our response to the rule-based international order. We need to collaborate, and we need to talk about how we should respond. But China is a very influential, important partner in the international arena. So we do hope that they recognize the role they should play in the international relations as a big, influential a partner to us. So towards that goal, we will continue to do our utmost effort to talk, engage, and work with our like-minded partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me finish with a question, which I hope will be, well, I hope it will be hopeful. And I don't want to be mawkish, but I do want to say that, these are tough times that we live in. COVID-19 doesn't appear to be going away with new variants. And we see, I think, in the last couple of weeks, how truly global it remains as a problem. We have problems of supply chain. We've got the increasing problems of climate change, et cetera, et cetera. But as people who are looking across the world and are working with colleagues across the world trying to solve these problems, can I just ask each of you to kind of give us a quick example of something you've seen in the last year or two that kind of demonstrates what's working well between our countries and what gives us a little bit of hope as we look forward as partners into the coming years. I'll start with you, High Commissioner Bisaria.
Certainly, I think that's a great question, and I would cite the example of vaccines. When the Quad got together, they talked of constructively dealing in the Indo Pacific region and trying to make vaccines available from the point of view of vaccine equity. And there is enough in our countries in terms of comparative advantage and strength, which we can use. So the idea was to use US technology, India's vaccine making capacity, Japanese technology and funds, and Australian logistics to get some of these vaccines going. And I can tell you that India has developed that capacity now. We've got about 1 billion vaccines in arms. We expect 2 billion vaccines in arms by January of next year, which means, and we expect a capacity of about 5 billion vaccines to manufacture. So for the 8 billion people on the planet, we will have that vaccine capacity. And all our countries can get together, and when the booster would be required, not if, but when, we would have that capacity in India to be able to provide these vaccines. But certainly in these and many contiguous areas related to the pandemic, our Indo-Pacific democracies could get together.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kawamura.
Oh, yes, I echo High Commissioner Bisaria. The ensemble is the right answer. There's no silver bullet. I have to underline that there's no silver bullet to the emerging imminent challenges we face over the past 1.5 years. Well, COVID-19 was the number one formidable for all of us. And among the like-minded countries, we responded with the best knowledge, with best efforts, and some positive outcomes. But actually, among the partners between Japan and Canada, we worked so hard on this context. Now we have reached the the vaccinations are in leading the rest of the G7 countries in this context, and we could show some outcomes by doing this. While they, on the other hand, we're facing the new challenge from the Omicron. But as I said in the beginning, that in the international context, we provided the international assistance for funding gap, to fill the funding gap of the vaccine acquisition by the developing partners. And also we engaged with the joint development of vaccines. More to come. So we have collaborated, worked together, and then there are some answers to these very difficult challenges in the international context. So there's no other alternatives. Well, the spirit of acting together is power, and then just implement what we believe the list of to do. And Japan and Canada have already worked out the action plan to go. So we will continuously engage ourselves for the arrangement, implementation, and with the spirit of a working together is a power. And I hope that we will see better environment and outcomes in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. High Commissioner Harvey, the final word is yours.
Thank you. Well, my colleagues have taken the best examples, but it does give me the opportunity to be perhaps slightly contrary to some of the commentary that we see. And I'm just going to talk about trade, because there's a lot of decrying of the trading system, and of course the moves in some countries to look more inward in their responses to COVID and the economic challenges that's presented, the supply chain challenges. But I think just like at the end of the global financial crisis, and what this current situation with the pandemic has shown is that the basis that we have in our trading system still stands up pretty well. Some of the major implications we could have seen as a result of COVID-19 on the international economy and the trading system didn't occur, because these same structures did stand the test of time. There was a little nationalism here or there. There was a little initial panic, but these things work themselves through. And I think you can actually see, the benefits of the rules-based system with respect to trade assisting the recovery. The initial narratives around the need to onshore, to reshore supply chains. That's really those arguments are not as strong as people thought they were at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was scrambling for PPE and then for vaccine supplies. So it does reinforce, if we look at it, the need for refocus on the rules-based system for trade, the international trading system, and see what we can do to improve it. On a regional basis, we've had successes in recent years. We've had RCEP, we've had the CPTPP. We've seen a range of smaller initiatives that people have been keen to join and to work with others on. And we've seen, although we're not quite there yet in the WTO, a really strong initiative about health and the trade and health initiative in the WTO. So for me, a little contrarian, and I am a tradie from way back, I might say this, but I think we need to reflect hard on the lessons here and do what needs to be done to reinforce the global trading system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Those are really, I think, you see in these answers actually and the very well articulated answers, the benefit of what we've built, and what our respective countries have built together across the Indo Pacific, and indeed globally, and democracies, all of us. I want to thank all three of you very much for your time. I'm going to turn over to Tina to give a formal thanks, but I'll just say that for me, it was a real pleasure to spend the last hour and a bit with you. I learned so much, and I really appreciate your work in our country, but also just the time you spent with us today. So thank you very much. Tina.
Thanks very much, Professor Loewen, and thank you to our very distinguished panelists for joining us for this conversation, and to Professor Loewen for moderating this very timely and important conversation. To learn more about the NATO Association, please visit our website and follow us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook to stay up to date on our events. This event was the first of a series of events that we'll be doing on Canada, NATO, and Indo Pacific. So we hope that you could join us on future events. And on behalf of the NATO Association of Canada, please make sure to share your feedback and comments with us if there were any questions you wanted to ask, and we will be sure to address them on our future events. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.